Welcome back, guys, for part number 2. So we're going to talk a little bit about the eugenics movement. And basically, the rise of the eugenics movement was tied to the level of crime, increase in immigration, and some other factors that gave rise to the fact that maybe, just maybe, there was some biological characteristics of people that caused them to become dangerous. And so the whole idea of a new dangerous classes began to emerge. Now, originally, much of these early theories were part of what Sir Francis Galton had built upon from other theorists regarding biological theories of criminality, and basically playing upon the fears of people at the time, created this new dangerous class. And so this process is that it led to the forced sterilization of hundreds of thousands of people in America and elsewhere. The idea being, if you can eliminate these dangerous classes from reproducing, then that'll be more beneficial to society, because society will, in essence, improve the human genetic stock. And this did take hold for a while. The book talks about Indiana, which was one of the first states to make sterilization an official policy, noting that hereditary plays a most important part in the transmission of crime, idiocy, and imbecility. So this whole idea of a dangerous class took hold, with the idea of hopefully making society benefit by only having a healthier genetic pool that wouldn't be so prone to commit crimes. Sounds a little bit scary, but some of the same ideas probably began to appear in the late 1930s and into the 1940s when we try to understand what role Hitler played in the advancement of World War II. All right. So just know that during this period of time, these type of ideas began to spread and began to be implemented in terms of a way to improve society and reduce those people that society believed were more prone to commit crimes. Now, in terms of our law enforcement during this period of time, one of the key things that was taking place in not only in law enforcement but in other labor groups was the idea of unionization. And the role of unionization isn't necessarily a bad thing, because if anything, it might professionalize a profession or an occupation. But between 1910 and 1920, police officers began to take an active role in creating labor unions and police organizations, such as the Fraternal Order of the Police and something like that. But it was important. I mean, the whole idea of collectively forming groups as a means to seek better pay, better benefits, better working conditions are key, I think, in any profession, because it makes people want to be part of that profession, part of that group. And so you'll have a better opportunity to select people who are most suited for a particular job. But this whole idea of unionization began to take place during this period of time. And again, it wasn't just with law enforcement, it was also other occupations at the time. Now, during this period, a couple key civilian reformers appeared. And when I talk about civilian reformers, these were not police chiefs or anyone in the law enforcement occupation. They were more or less researchers, much like we have college professors today whose job it is to research and understand policing in its different levels. And three of these police reformers we're going to talk about. And the first one we're going to talk about is Fold. Now, Fold wrote one of the first comprehensive and readable studies on police administration. And his vision for Policing forecasts many of the progressive reforms that would characterize policing in the coming years, including a better use of police discretion while performing daily duties. So trying to limit that discretion if we can. He also talked about more stringent hiring requirements and a recognition of the dangers of political patronage. He also recommended better police training in the proper use of deadly force and better systems for scrutinizing police misconduct. So these civilian police reformers began to take an interest in the law enforcement profession and began to provide suggestions in terms of how to professionalize this field. And so, from that list that I read you, for those of you who are in the profession and those of you who have tested to get into the profession, note that these are things that are very common today. All right. We want to have stringent hiring requirements. In other words, not just anybody can become a police officer, which is why we go through this lengthy process and testing and background and psychological and all the other aspects that go into this profession. But he also began to realize the dangers associated with political patronage, and that will become important as we begin to talk about law enforcement, not just in, from the 1920s now up until about the 1940s and 1950s, where you're going to be able to see that this patronage, especially in places like New York and other things like that, was very strong. And so that's going to lead to some changes in the 1950s and into the 1960s, but I'm jumping ahead, okay? So that was important. I mean, understanding those things was, a huge milestone in terms of beginning to better prepare ourselves and better change the law enforcement profession. Next was Raymond Fosdick, and he did a study on virtually every major European police force, fostered an image of a professional brand of policing that outshone the decentralized and more amateurish American counterparts. Now, the author concluded in his study that American policing was victimized by a lack of professionalism and rife with political corruption. And so, as compared to our European counterparts, again, we were lagging behind in terms of the professionalization and the level of political patronage. And so he was one of those guys regarding decentralized versus centralized policing. And, as you know, in this country, we are decentralized, okay? That's why we have all the police departments that we have, okay? We don't have a national police force. We don't have one big state law enforcement agency. We are very decentralized in the sense that we have, I don't know what it is, 22,000 some odd law enforcement agencies in this country, okay? So that whole idea of centralization versus decentralization is something that is talked about in all types of police administration books, in terms of trying to understand which concept is best, okay? Finally, we'll talk about Bruce Smith, and he was instrumental in creating the Uniform Crime Reports, which began in 1930. Over the next 25 years of his career, he would become the country's foremost expert on police operations as he helped improve many forces, including those in Chicago, Baltimore, San Francisco, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. But key was this whole idea of uniform crime reports, some way that our country, our nation, can gather all the crime reports or all the crime statistics in the nation. And so he was the one that developed the Uniform Crime Report. So it's pretty good job. Next, we'll talk about police professionalization, and these came from those individuals who were police chiefs, most likely, or had some law enforcement experience and background. And, one of the things in terms of professionalization was there was an effort to replace partisan police boards with professional chiefs of police, and that was an important step towards professionalism. So in other words, partisan meaning political. So those people who were part of police boards probably in some means or another contributed to someone's political campaign, and that's like they got on police boards. And so the goal here in terms of police professionalization was to get away from the partisan police boards and go to hiring a professional police chief to run the police department. And so during this period of time, a couple guys made significant impact on our profession. And these are areas that you might consider as a topic for your paper if you haven't already settled on one, which would be the contributions of August Vollmer and Fred Kohler in terms of their forward thinking in terms of law enforcement. Now, August Vollmer in the early 1900s was police chief in Berkeley, California. Among his earliest achievements was establishing a department code of ethics that barred the acceptance of gratuities and favors under penalty of dismissal. So he began to approach this thing by developing a law enforcement code of ethics. And so that is extremely important today because we have a law enforcement code of ethics that our employees, chief on down, are expected to abide by. So he made, a huge impact here just by developing this police officer code of ethics. He required that prospective police officers pursue a college education in an era when a high school education was not even required by most departments. So again, advancing the idea of a more well-rounded individual to become a police officer. His other innovations included rigorous in-service training and probation for first-time officers. Probation for first-time offenders. Back then, obviously, the police chief of the community had significant say in terms of all types of activities going on with the criminal justice system. So the idea of probation for first-time offenders was taking hold. And probation had been around for just a little while. He developed the first modus operandi system in 1906. So MO, in other words, a certain characteristic or signature of the criminal. So he began to think about those type of things in terms of the law enforcement profession. Established the first motorcycle patrol in 1911, and as well as many others. Vollmer's emphasis on scientific policing, education, higher standards, and the centralization of police services still influences the role of police in society. And the centralization meaning that everything is out of one shop, out of one location. So, the city of Berkeley Police Department, that's centralizing police resources. All right, so you have an awful lot going on there. You have, police officers who are trained, who are educated, that are dispatched when we start talking about when those started taking place. But the whole idea is that the centralization of police services. And so people could come to the police department and get remedies for whatever problems they have because it was centralized. All the resources were there, all the things that they think they might have needed to resolve their issues was there. So the whole idea of centralizing law enforcement. Now, Fred Kohler took over the Cleveland Police Department, a force with a reputation for corruption, in 1903, and placed his stamp of reform on the force. Among the reforms implemented by Kohler was Sunrise Court, which allowed minor offenders to get to work on time through quick processing following a minor violation and therefore keep their jobs. So again, a little forward thinking at the time. In 1908, Kohler introduced his Golden Rule policy, which dealt more informally with juvenile offenders. And even to this day, we tend to deal informally with first-time juvenile offenders who do not commit a serious crime. We tend to resolve them or attempt to resolve them in a informal manner through probation. The role of law enforcement is not as it was back in the 1900s in terms of dealing with kids. So nowadays we have probation departments that deal with that. But I think it's important just to understand that Fred Kohler and August Vollmer made significant impacts in law enforcement as a profession during this early period of time in the early 1900s, right? And so we're going to stop here, and then we're going to go to our third phase. I'm sorry about that. Hopefully we'll be able to wrap it up then. All right, so I'll see you guys in just a bit. Thanks.